Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we'll be discussing some more critical reasoning questions for CAT and other management entrance examinations. The techniques for attempting the critical reasoning questions we have already discussed in the previous videos. So you might be well versed with the techniques. People who are watching this channel for the first time, I would advise them to please go through the previous videos on critical reasoning so that you get the good understanding regarding the basics, then only come to this video. Otherwise your understanding or comprehension might have certain gaps, or your knowledge might not be perfect in the sense. So that is better to watch the previous videos and then come to this video. Okay, so we will go to the straight away to the questions. So the first question, read the question, understand the passage well, then go through the options, do the process of elimination, identify possible answers, then select the best answer. All right. So first we will discuss certain terms that you may not be aware of. So that once we clarify those terms, your understanding will be much better. Litigation explosion. What is litigation explosion? Litigation means the process of filing a case against somebody or some company, and then fighting the case and obtaining a verdict. The entire process is called litigation. So litigation explosion means too many cases being filed is called litigation explosion, or a lot of cases being filed in the courts is called a litigation explosion. And what is a product liability suit? Product liability suit means any case being filed against a company for defective products, that is called a product liability suit. So the term product liability suit indicates cases being filed against certain companies for defective products or products that are not having the required quality. So such kind of suits are known as product liability suits. So what is the meaning of the first sentence? First sentence says that some commentators are complaining that there is a huge number of cases being filed in the USA against manufacturing companies in USA for product liability suits. Means these complaints are regarding the defective quality of the product. So these people who are filing the cases, they are demanding compensation. So this is what commentators are complaining, and what has it has resulted? It has resulted in high cost for the companies or the businesses. So because a lot of people are filing complaints against the defective products manufactured by the companies are facing high costs. So what could be the reason? When some people are demanding compensation for defective products, the companies may have to give compensation, which will result in huge expenses for the company. So that is what some commentators are complaining, that because of this huge number of cases, litigation explosion means high number of cases. So huge number of cases being filed against the US manufacturing companies on account of product liability suits or defective products. This is resulting in a lot of extra expenses for the businesses. And the next sentence is, however, these complaints are based mainly on myth. So means what are these complaints? Means the complaints that the commentators are making. So what is the complaint the commentators are making? US businesses are having to face extra expenses because of the product liability suits. So this statement says that these complaints are mainly based mainly on myth, means these complaints are not correct. They are just mythical complaints or imaginary complaints. So means in simple terms you can say that the commentators complaint that the US companies are facing lot of extra expenses because of product liability suits is not correct. That is the meaning. So what is correct then? So he is then the supporting statement to make this argument is given. What is that? Statistics show that the number of successful product liability suits has remained almost the same. Means the number of cases in which the customers have won, that is the successful product liability suit. So a product liability suit will be filed by a customer who has purchased a defective product, and the company has to fight the case, and if the customer wins, the company has to pay a compensation. So the statistics are showing that such cases where the customers are winning the product liability suits, they are have remained the same. So even though the number of cases filed against the manufacturing companies might have increased, but the number of cases in which the customers who have filed the cases where they have won, that has remained the same. So there is no increase in the cases that are won by the customers in which the companies have to pay compensation. That's not increased, and the average sum awarded in damages has grown no faster than the inflation rate. Means the average amount that is given as compensation, damages means compensation, so the average amount given by the companies as compensation has also not increased more than the inflation rate. So inflation rate is the rate at which the value of the money is decreasing. So when anything, the cost of anything is less than the inflation rate, means it is acceptable. So this is why it says that the compensation paid by the companies has not increased more than the inflation. So this is the reason given to support the author's argument. So what is basically the author's argument? The author is arguing that the US companies are not having any extra expenses because of the litigation explosion, and he is supporting this argument by saying that the number of successful cases that are won by the customers have remained almost the same, means previously and at the present times, even though the number of cases might have increased, but the number of cases that are actually won by the customers, they have remained the same, and the average amount also has not increased more than the inflation rate. So because of this, the author is saying that the companies are not having to face any extra expenses because of the increase in the number of cases being filed under the product liability suit. So the author is agreeing that the number of cases being filed against companies under product liability suits have increased, but the number of cases that are being won by the customers, they have remained the same. The amount also has not increased, as a result of which the companies are not facing any extra expenses. This is the author's argument. Now, which of the following would weaken the argument? So you have to find a statement that weakens the argument. So you have to understand what is the argument. The argument in simple terms is that the companies are not having any extra expenses because of the increase in the product liability suits. So anything that indicates that the companies are facing extra expenses because of the increased product liability suits will definitely weaken the argument. So whenever we talk about an argument, first identify the fact that supports the argument, and anything that weakens that fact should be the weakening statement. So our fact is that what is the fact that supports our argument or the author's argument? The fact is that the number of cases that are won by the people who filed the product liability suits, they have remained the same. Even though the number of cases have increased, the number of cases that are won, they are remaining the same, and the amount of compensation paid to the customers, they also have not increased too much. So this is why the author says that the companies are not facing any extra expenses. So anything that weakens that would be our argument, or in simple terms, anything that says that proves that the companies have to pay extra expenses because of the increased product liability suits, that will be our answer. the number of unsuccessful suits has skyrocketed, imposing huge new legal expenses on businesses. So here it says that even though number of successful suits are remaining the same, the number of unsuccessful suits has skyrocketed. Skyrocketed means increased very much. So even though the number of successful cases are remaining the same as per the passage, there are still a number of unsuccessful cases. So whenever a case has been filed against a company, the company has to go to court and defend the case, right? So when company has to defend the case, they have to pay legal expenses. So this is resulting in expenses, additional expenses for the company. So this option basically means that even if the number of cases that are won by the people who have filed the suits have remained the same. There are, as per the passage, the number of cases have increased, as a result of which the number of unsuccessful cases also has skyrocketed. And when the legal expenses for the companies are not just because of the cases that are won, it is also because of the cases that are unsuccessful. Because whether the case is successful or unsuccessful, the company has to fight the case in the court, for which they have to pay legal expenses. So this option means that irrespective of the number of cases irrespective of the number of suits that are successful, the companies still have to bear a lot of expenses. So this means that our argument is weakened. So because we have to find an argument that says that the companies are facing extra expenses, so this option is a possible answer. Keep it in your mind. Option B, several of the largest awards ever made in product liability suits occurred within the last 2 years. It says that the some of the largest compensations, awards means compensations, ever made in product liability cases occurred within the last 2 years. So that means that there are some very huge compensations being awarded by the courts to the customers under product liability suits. So obviously the companies might have had to pay a lot of amount. But is this a weakening argument? It says that several of the largest awards, that is true, but it is contradicting with the fact given to us. It says that the average sum awarded is still below the inflation. Yes, there might be some extreme cases where very huge compensations were given by the courts in favor of the people who have filed cases against the companies, but the average remains the same. Our average is still lesser than the inflation. So since the average expense is still lesser than the inflation, even though there may be extreme cases, this means that the companies are still not paying or facing too many expenditure under this. So this option is not correct, because we need to have a statement that says that the companies are facing extra expenditure. Option C, the rise of the consumer movement has encouraged citizens to seek legal redress for product flaws. Yes, the consumer movement has made customers aware. They are seeking a legal redress, means legal remedies for the mistakes in their products. So this is true. This is also given in the passage that this is the reason why there is a litigation explosion. So consumers are becoming aware and there is a litigation explosion. True, but whether it is weakening the statement, this is not weakening the statement, because this statement does not prove that the companies are having to face more expenses. Any statement that proves that the companies are having to face more expenses, that should be our answer. This statement is not saying that, because this statement is already included in our argument given here. So that is why this is not going to change the facts in any way. So this is not an answer. Option D, lawyers often undertake product liability cases on a contingency basis. Contingency basis means when they will not ask for money in advance. Only when the final compensation is awarded, then they will make their payment. So that their payment is based on size of the damages award. So you can say that lawyers are undertaking these cases and not demanding a payment at the time of fighting the case. Only when there is a verdict, then they will ask for their legal expenses. So we don't know whether these lawyers, with the option is talking about the lawyers who are arguing the case in favor of the customers, or the lawyers who are arguing the case in favor of the companies. So if the lawyers are arguing the case in favor of the companies, if these lawyers are arguing cases, we are concerned only with lawyers arguing cases in favor of companies, because customers, whether they are having expenses or not, that is not our botheration. Our concern is only regarding the expenses to be paid by the company. So if the lawyers of the companies are undertaking these cases on a contingency basis, that means they are not demanding payment at the time of fighting the case. They will demand payment only when the verdict is issued. In such cases, the companies don't have to pay any extra expenses, because the number of successful suits are very low. Means the number of cases in which the companies have to pay compensation, they are very low. In such cases, these lawyers may not be demanding fees. So in such cases, the companies, they don't have to pay anything, so the extra expenses will not be there. So this option is actually supporting the argument, not weakening it. So this is why it is not a good answer. We need something that means that the companies have to pay extra expenses. This option, if applied for the companies, then it means that companies don't have to pay any extra expenses. So this is not our answer. Option E, juries often award damages in product liability suits out of emotional sympathy for an injured customer. It says that why juries are awarding compensation. So the juries have an emotional sympathy for an injured customer. So if even if this is true, what is the meaning here? It is contradicting with the fact given, because the fact in the passage is that the successful product liability suits are remaining the same. So if the juries are awarding damages out of emotional sympathy, what should happen? The number of successful suits should increase, but it has not increased. So this option is contradicting the fact given in the passage. So it cannot be a statement that weaken the argument, because we need to find something that is in line with the argument. Still, it proves that the companies are facing more legal expenses. So that is why all these statements are wrong. So there is only one statement which means that the companies have to pay extra legal expenses, even though the number of cases that are successful are very less. So even though the number of product liability suits which are successful are less, even in such cases, the companies have to pay legal expenses for all the unsuccessful cases also. So that is why this option is indicating that the companies are facing extra expenditure because of the increase in the number of product liability cases. So this means that the author's argument is weakened, and the companies are paying more expenses because of the increase in the number of cases being filed. So option A should be the answer. I hope it is clear. This is a standard or a typical critical reasoning question that you will face in your actual exam. So you need careful analysis, only then you will be able to find an answer. I hope the technique that I have applied is very clear to you. Now going to the next question. So this one is very simple. If you have watched the previous videos and understand the difference between the assumption and conclusion, inference, fact, etc., then you can very easily identify the answer here. So our question is to find an assumption on which the argument is depending. So what is the argument? The argument is that even though some poor Americans are excluded from the census, some rich Americans are also excluded from the census, as a result of which the statistical portrait or the statistical outcome of the census is not affected. So what is the census? The census is the process of enumerating or counting the number of people in a country, their social background and their economic background. All these things are taken into consideration. So it is the process by which the number of people or the population of a country is counted, and the segregation of the population on the basis of their social background and economic background, these are identified. That process is known as a census, and it's the basic argument or the conclusion in the passage is that the portrait or the statistical outcome of the census is not affected because of the exclusion of certain poor Americans, because some rich Americans are also not counted. So this is the conclusion. So what is an assumption? Assumption is any unstated fact that supports the conclusion. So any fact that is not stated in the passage, but we can infer that from whatever facts are given, and it is supporting the conclusion, is called an assumption. We have seen this in the previous videos. So what is the best assumption here? See, the conclusion is that the basic statistical outcome of the census is not affected by the non-exclusion of the non-inclusion of poor people. And what is the reason? The reason is that, so even though some poor people are excluded from the census, some rich people are also excluded from the census, so that the final effect is the same. So what is the assumption? Well, if the poor people who are excluded from the census and the rich people who are excluded from the census, if the final effect should be the same, what should be needed? The number of poor people who are excluded from the census should be equal to the number of rich people who are excluded from the census. That is when the final result should balance, or there should not be any effect on the final result. So very clearly you can say that what should be the answer? Option C, the percentage of poor Americans uncounted by the census is close to the percentage of rich Americans uncounted. So this is the assumption on which the argument is depending, because only when we assume that the number or the percentage of poor people who are excluded from the census is equal to the percentage of rich people who are excluded, then that means the final outcome or the final statistical portrait is accurate. There is no effect on the final outcome. So this is the assumption that supports the conclusion that the census outcome is not affected by the exclusion of poor people. So this is the reason. So option C is the clear answer. You don't even have to look at the other options, but for the sake of discussion, you can think about the other answers. Both the rich and the poor are personal economic reasons to avoid being counted. It is talking about the reasons why they are not being counted, or some people are why they are abstaining or not taking part in the census. We are not bothered about whether why the rich and the poor are not taking part in the census. Our argument is that these rich and the poor, even if they don't, some rich and some poor people, even if they don't participate in the census, the final outcome is not affected. That is the argument. So for this to happen, the percentage should be the same. Option B, all Americans may reasonably be classified as either poor or rich. This is again not stated or implied in the passage. There could be many people who are middle class Americans, but the passage is only talking about poor people, some poor people being excluded. So we are not bothered about whether all the poor people are classified as poor or rich. There may be some Americans who are middle class also, or upper middle class, lower middle class, etc. That is not at all discussed in the argument, or anything that is not discussed in the argument. You need not bother about it when we discuss about the assumptions, because assumptions are always derived from the facts provided to us. Since there are no facts that are given regarding the people who are classified as neither poor or rich, we don't have to bother about this. Option D, the number of homeless Americans is approximately equal to the number of rich Americans. Can we say that our concern is only about the number of poor people? Homeless means poor people. So our concern is only about the number of poor people who are not participating in the census, and the number of rich people who are not participating in the second census. This statement is saying that the number of poor people in America is equal to the number of rich people in America. We don't know that. The passage is not saying anything about the number of poor or the total number of poor people and total number of rich people in America. Our concern is only about the number of poor people who are not participating or not counted in the census, and the number of rich people who are also not counted in the census. So that is why this is also wrong. Option E, the primary purpose of census is to analyze the economic status of the American population. Again, something that is completely irrelevant. We are not talking about the primary purpose of the census or the analysis of the economic status. Our argument is that the census outcome or the statistical image of the country given by the census is accurate. So that is the argument. Even though some poor people are not counted, the statistical portrait is accurate. So the obvious argument is that some rich people are also not counted, and the percentage of rich people who are not counted and the percentage of rich people who are not counted, they are the same, means the statistical portrait remains the same. So you can very easily say that option C is the clear answer. This is a simple question. You have, if you have understood the importance of an assumption, what is the technique used in identifying assumptions, which we have discussed in the previous exercises, this question should be answered by you in less than 1 minute, because it is a very simple question. Only thing is that you should be able to identify what is an assumption, what is it, how is it different from the argument or the conclusion, what is a fact, and how an assumption is derived from a fact. Okay, now we have to go to the third question. Again, the fact given is very simple. The passage is very simple. You don't have to break your head too much about the passage. What is it saying? It's time we stop searching for new statistics to suggest that we are not spending enough on education. Means it says that in simple sentence, it says that don't try to search for new statistics to prove that we are not spending enough on education. Means we are spending enough on education. So the very first sentence, if you break it down into simple idea, it means that we are spending enough on education. Don't try to unnecessarily break your head trying to think about new statistics to prove that we are not spending enough on education. You are not going to get any such statistics, because we are spending enough on education. And that is reinforced by the second statement: education spending increased 30% overall during the last decade. So the argument in the passage is that we are now spending a lot of money on education. Education spending has increased 30% during the last 10 years. Decade means 10 years. So this is the argument. Now, which statement would weaken the argument? So you have to find a statement that proves that no, education spending has not increased during the last 10 years, because this is the argument. So argument is that education spending has increased by 30% during the last 10 years. We have to find a statement that proves that education spending has not increased during the last 10 years. That would be our answer. So we will analyze the options. Despite increased spending on education, enrollment in our elementary and secondary schools declined about 4%. So this statement you can directly eliminate, because the statement itself says that despite increased spending on education. Our argument is that educational spending has increased, and this option is also saying that despite increased spending on education, enrollment, we are not bothered about enrollment or what are secondary schools, what is enrollment, whether it is declining. This is not our argument. Our argument is that spending on education has increased during the last 10 years. This option itself is admitting that spending on education has increased. So obviously this is not our answer, because we have to find a statement that says that spending on education has not increased, whereas this statement is clearly implying that spending on education has increased. Option B, our spending on gasoline increased more than 100%. See, whenever you have an argument and there is a counter argument which is doing some comparison, this is not at all a good answer, because comparison is never considered a good answer unless and until you have other no other options. You should not entertain any comparisons, because we have not discussed about the spending on gasoline in our passage. Our discussion is limited only to the spending on education. Whether we are spending on gasoline 300% or not, that is not at all material to our discussion or relevant to our discussion. So this is called an irrelevant argument, where we talk about something else. Instead of focusing on the topic, we talk about something else. It is called a diversionary argument. This is not at all considered a good argument or a good statement or a good answer. Then option C, when adjusted for inflation, our per pupil expenditure on education this year is less than that it was 10 years ago. So when you read it closely, when adjusted for inflation means when you consider the inflation rate also. Inflation rate means the rate at which the prices are going up or the value of money is decreasing. That is called inflation. So when this the spending on education is adjusted for inflation means when you think about or you reduce the value by subtracting the inflation percentage, what you get, our per pupil expenditure on education this year is less than that it was 10 years ago. So maybe 10 years ago, if for one student or one pupil the government is paying around 1000 rupees, even now, even though the per pupil expenditure has increased 30% overall, if you reduce the inflation part or if you adjust the inflation part, the per pupil expenditure has actually come down. So what is the meaning here? The 30% increase is purely on account of inflation. It is not because government is actually spending more amount on education. So this is basically saying that the actual amount of spending on education has not increased in the last 10 years, because the increase is only because of the inflation. There is no actual increase in the amount spent on education. So this is a good answer, because we have to find a statement that says that the education spending has not increased. So this option clearly tells us that the increase of 30% is only because of the inflation. The per pupil expenditure on education is actually less than it was 10 years ago. So this is a probable answer. Keep it in your mind. Option D, 11 other economically developed nations spend more on education. Again, I told you, comparison. We are not talking about whether economically developed nations are spending or not spending. So comparison is never a good answer. You can straight away eliminate it. The achievement levels of our students have been declining steadily since 1960, and the last decade produced no reversal in this trend. So it says that the achievement of students have declined, and there is no reversal to this trend. Means this trend is continuing, means the achievement of our students are declining, continuously declining. The achievement may be declining. Our question is, or our discussion is not about the achievement of the students. Our discussion is only about the amount of money spent on education. Whether it is actually resulting in achievement of students, that is not discussed in the passage. So this again is not correct. We don't have to bother about these kind of irrelevant options. They are given just to confuse you. So we know that all the other options are wrong. So this is the only correct answer, which gives you a clear idea that the per pupil expenditure on education has actually gone down during the last decade. So that is why it weakens the argument given in the passage. So very clearly option C should be the answer. I hope this is clear. So these are the three questions which I thought we would share with you, because these are the logic or the technique that we have used in these questions are very relevant in your future discussions. So always think about the techniques. Do not bother about the questions in as such, because these questions are not going to be repeated, but the techniques will always be repeated. So we have to remember the techniques that we have to apply in finding out the answer. So hope you found the video to be useful in your learning. If you have liked it, please share and subscribe, and try to circulate this video and this channel among your friends who are preparing for the exam, so that I get more reach, so that we can bring more useful content to you. Thank you and bye bye.